He thought it would be just another lonely visit to his son's grave, another year of silence, regret, and unanswered questions. But today, someone was already there, a young waitress, on her knees, sobbing, and beside her, a little boy, no older than 4, holding a wilted flower. The Mafia boss froze. She didn't look like family. She didn't even look like someone who knew his world. But the way she cried, the way the child gently wiped her tears, something felt wrong. Or worse, something felt familiar. When the boy turned around, the boss felt his chest tighten. The eyes, the exact same eyes as his son. The waitress noticed him and panicked, her whole body shaking, like she'd been caught committing a crime. "Please," she whispered, pulling the boy close. "I'm sorry. We'll leave." But the boss stepped closer, voice trembling. "Tell me, why does your child look exactly like my son?" Her lips quivered, her hands trembled, and for the first time in years, the Mafia boss felt fear, not of enemies, but of the truth she was about to reveal. The next words out of her mouth would change everything. "Stay with me until the end," because what she reveals next at that gravesite shattered the Mafia boss and changed the fate of that child forever. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Vincent the Wolf Santangelo had built his empire on 3 pillars: respect, fear, and absolute control. For 47 years, he had commanded the most powerful crime family on the East Coast. His name alone could silence a room, stop conversations mid-sentence, and make grown men pray they'd never crossed his path. But standing here in this quiet cemetery, surrounded by weathered headstones and ancient oak trees, Vincent felt smaller than he had in decades. The morning mist clung to the ground like ghostly fingers, and the October air carried the scent of dying leaves. Vincent pulled his black cashmere coat tighter around his shoulders. He had been making this pilgrimage for 3 years now, every October 15th, the anniversary of the day his world collapsed. Anthony Michael Santangelo, born March 2nd, 1995, died October 15th, 2021, beloved son. The headstone was simple, elegant, nothing flashy. Vincent had learned the hard way that drawing attention to yourself, even in death, could bring unwanted visitors. But this morning, as he approached the familiar spot beneath the sprawling maple tree, he discovered he wasn't alone. A woman knelt in front of the grave. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and her long brown hair fell like a curtain around her face. She wore a simple black dress, not expensive but clean and carefully pressed. The kind of dress someone wears when they can't afford designer clothes, but still want to show respect. Beside her sat a small boy with dark curls and olive skin. He couldn't have been more than 4 years old. In his tiny hands, he clutched a single daisy that had seen better days. The child watched the woman with concern, occasionally reaching out to pat her shoulder with the gentle touch that only children possess. Vincent stopped walking. His hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his coat, where he kept his peace. But he caught himself. This wasn't business. This was something else entirely. The woman hadn't noticed him yet. She continued crying, her voice breaking as she whispered words he couldn't quite make out. But the boy turned around and looked directly at Vincent. Time stopped. Those eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold around the iris. The same eyes Vincent saw every morning in the mirror. The same eyes his son Anthony had inherited. The same eyes that had looked up at him with love and admiration for 26 years before everything went wrong. Vincent felt his knees weaken. The boy tilted his head, studying this tall stranger in the expensive coat. There was something familiar in that gesture too. The way Anthony used to look at people when he was trying to figure them out. "Mama," the boy whispered, tugging on the woman's sleeve. "There's a man." The woman's head snapped up, and her red-rimmed eyes widened in terror when she saw Vincent standing there. She scrambled to her feet, pulling the boy behind her like a shield. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice thick with tears and fear. "We didn't mean to disturb anyone. We'll go right now. She grabbed the boy's hand and started backing away from the grave. But Vincent couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was seeing. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The boy had Anthony's eyes, Anthony's nose, even the same stubborn set to his jaw that Vincent remembered from when his son was young. "Wait," Vincent finally managed to say, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. The woman froze, her grip tightening on the child's hand. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "We weren't doing anything wrong. I just wanted to—" Her voice broke completely. Vincent took a step closer, and she flinched. He realized how he must look to her, a large, imposing man in an expensive coat, with scars on his knuckles and eyes that had seen too much violence. She had no idea who he was, but she could sense the danger that clung to him like cologne. "Tell me your name," Vincent said quietly. His tone was softer now, but it still carried the weight of authority that had never left him. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Chen." "And the boy?" Sarah's arms tightened protectively around the child. "This is Tommy. He's my son." Vincent knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. This child could have been Anthony at 4 years old. The same curious expression, the same fearless way of looking at the world. "Hello, Tommy," Vincent said gently. "That's a nice flower you have there." Tommy looked down at the wilted daisy in his hand, then back at Vincent. "It's for the sleeping man," he said simply. "Mama said he can't wake up anymore, so I brought him something pretty." Vincent's throat constricted. "That's very kind of you." He looked up at Sarah, whose face had gone pale. "Why are you here? What connection do you have to my son?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. "Your son?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anthony Santangelo," Vincent said, rising to his full height. "This is his grave, and I'm his father." Sarah stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a nearby headstone. Her hand flew to her mouth, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oh, God," she breathed. "Oh, God, I didn't know you would. I never thought you'd—" "Answer my question," Vincent said, his patience wearing thin despite his attempts to stay calm. "Why are you here? Why does your boy look like—" "Because he's not just my boy," Sarah interrupted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Tommy isn't just mine. He was—" She looked down at the child, then back at Vincent, her whole body trembling. Vincent felt the world tilt on its axis. He had survived wars, betrayals, assassination attempts, and the loss of his only child. But nothing had prepared him for the possibility that Anthony might have left something behind. Someone behind. "Say it," Vincent commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah lifted her chin, finding courage he didn't know she possessed. "Tommy is Anthony's son," she said clearly. "Your grandson." The cemetery fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the trees. Vincent stared at the woman, at Sarah, trying to process what she'd just revealed. His grandson, Anthony's child. The boy had his son's eyes because they were his son's eyes. Tommy, oblivious to the weight of the moment, had wandered back to the grave and was carefully placing his daisy next to the headstone. He patted the marble gently, the way a child might pat a sleeping parent. "Sleep good, Daddy," Tommy whispered. "Mama and I will come see you again soon." Vincent's vision blurred. The child knew. Somehow, this 4-year-old boy knew that the man buried beneath this stone was his father. And Vincent had been mourning alone for 3 years, never knowing that a piece of Anthony lived on. Sarah watched him carefully, as if waiting for an explosion. In her world, men like Vincent, men with power and violence in their past, didn't handle surprises well. She had no way of knowing that beneath the hardened exterior, Vincent Santangelo was just a broken father who had thought he'd lost everything. He'd lost everything. "How?" Vincent's voice cracked like breaking glass. "How is this possible? Anthony never mentioned— he never said anything about—" Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving streaks across her cheeks. "He didn't know," she whispered. I found out I was pregnant 3 days after he died. 3 days, Mr. Santangelo. 3 days too late to tell him he was going to be a father. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his hand reaching out to steady himself against a nearby headstone. Anthony had died not knowing he had created life, had died without ever seeing his son's face, without ever holding him, without ever knowing that a part of him would continue. That's impossible, Vincent said, but his voice lacked conviction. The dates, the resemblance, the way Tommy moved with Anthony's natural grace, it all aligned with horrible, beautiful precision. Sarah's chin trembled as she continued. I was a waitress at Moretti's on 5th Street. Anthony used to come in every Tuesday night, always ordered the same thing, chicken parmesan and coffee black. He'd sit in the corner booth and read his books. Her voice grew softer, warmer. He was so different from the other men who came in. Gentle. He'd actually look at me when I talked, like what I had to say mattered. Vincent closed his eyes. Moretti's. He knew the place. A small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. Family-owned for 3 generations. Anthony had mentioned it once or twice. Said they made the best chicken parmesan outside of his grandmother's kitchen. But Vincent had been too busy, too focused on business, to pay attention to his son's simple pleasures. We started talking, Sarah continued, her eyes distant with memory. At first, just small things. How was his day? Did he like the weather? But gradually, he started staying later. After the dinner rush, when the restaurant was quieter, he'd help me stack chairs and wipe down tables. He told me he was trying to distance himself from his family's business. Said he wanted to build something clean, something he could be proud of. Vincent's heart clenched. Anthony had been planning to leave the family, planning to walk away from everything Vincent had built, everything he'd hoped to pass down. They'd fought about it, screamed at each other in Vincent's study while his wife begged them both to calm down. Anthony wanted out, wanted to go legitimate, wanted to use his business degree for something that wouldn't require looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. You have to understand, Sarah said, stepping closer, her fear gradually being replaced by something fiercer, protective love. Anthony talked about you all the time. He loved you, but he was terrified of disappointing you. He said you'd built this empire with your bare hands, that you'd sacrificed everything for your family's future, but he couldn't. He wouldn't follow in those footsteps. So he chose you instead, Vincent said quietly. There was no accusation in his voice, only a deep, aching sadness. Sarah nodded. We fell in love slowly, then all at once. He'd come to the restaurant every night, not just Tuesdays. We'd take long walks through Central Park after my shifts ended. He told me about his dreams, opening his own legitimate business, maybe a restaurant or a bookstore, somewhere honest people could work and build something good. She paused, watching Tommy, who was now sitting cross-legged on the grass, talking quietly to the headstone. He proposed to me on a bench overlooking the lake. No ring, just a promise that we'd figure it out together. Vincent felt tears threatening for the first time in years. His son had found love, had found hope, had found a future worth fighting for. And Vincent had been too blind, too stubborn, too caught up in protecting his legacy to see that Anthony already had everything he needed. What happened the night he died? Vincent asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. Sarah's composure cracked again. He came to my apartment around 9 o'clock. He was excited, nervous, pacing around my tiny kitchen like a caged animal. He said he'd finally worked up the courage to tell you everything. About me, about his plans to leave the business, about wanting to start fresh. He was going to drive to your house that night and have it out with you once and for all. Vincent's blood turned to ice. He remembered that night with crystal clarity. He'd been expecting Anthony, had prepared for another argument about responsibility and family loyalty. But Anthony never arrived. Instead, Vincent got a phone call at 2 a.m. from his lieutenant, Marco. There'd been a car accident, a collision at the intersection of Broadway and Canal Street. Anthony's BMW had been T-boned by a drunk driver running a red light. He never made it to my house, Vincent whispered. I waited up all night, Sarah said, her voice breaking again. He promised he'd call me after he talked to you, no matter how late it was. When morning came and I still hadn't heard from him, I called the restaurant. That's when Mrs. Moretti told me about the accident. She'd heard it on the news. Vincent stared at his grandson, who was now arranging small pebbles around the base of the headstone with intense concentration. You were pregnant, 3 months along, but I didn't know yet. I'd been feeling sick, tired, but I thought it was just stress from work. After Anthony died, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks. That's when I went to the doctor. Sarah's voice grew stronger. When she told me I was carrying Anthony's baby, it was like getting a piece of him back, like he'd left me the most precious gift he could. Tommy looked up from his pebble arrangement and smiled at Vincent. Are you Tommy's grandpa? He asked with the directness that only children possess. Vincent's throat closed completely. He knelt down again, this time extending his hand toward the boy. Tommy studied it for a moment, then placed his small fingers in Vincent's palm. The touch was electric, warm, trusting, alive. Yes, Vincent managed to say. I think I am. Tommy's smile widened. Mama said my daddy was brave and strong and that he loved her very much. She said he's watching over us from heaven, and that's why we come here to talk to him. Vincent looked up at Sarah, who was watching the interaction with tears streaming down her face. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He asked. Why didn't you tell me about Tommy? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Because I was terrified, she admitted. Anthony told me stories about your world, Mr. Santangelo, about the violence, the danger, the way enemies use family members as weapons. I was a 23-year-old waitress with no money and no connections. What if you thought I was lying? What if you thought I was trying to scam you? What if you decided Tommy was a liability? Vincent felt the weight of his reputation, his choices, his entire life crushing down on him. This woman had carried his grandchild alone, raised him alone, protected him alone, all because she feared the very man who would have given everything to help her. Or worse, Sarah continued, what if you believed me and decided that Tommy belonged in your world? Anthony died trying to escape that life. He died driving away from violence and toward something clean and honest. I couldn't let his son get pulled into the same darkness his father fought so hard to leave behind. Vincent understood. For the first time in years, he understood something completely and clearly. Sarah hadn't kept Tommy from him out of spite or greed or malice. She'd kept him safe the only way she knew how, by staying invisible, by keeping the Santangelo name buried with Anthony, by raising her son far from the shadows that had haunted his father. But now the truth was out, and there was no going back. Tommy tugged on Vincent's sleeve. Grandpa, do you want to help me make my daddy's grave pretty? Mama brings flowers, but I like to make patterns with the rocks. Vincent looked down at this child, his grandson, his legacy, his second chance, and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door that had been locked for too long finally swinging wide. I'd be honored, Vincent said softly. As they worked together, arranging stones and straightening flowers, Vincent caught Sarah watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was love there, and fear, and something that might have been hope. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and warming the ancient stones of the cemetery. 3 generations of Santangelos knelt together in the grass, each carrying their own grief, their own love, their own dreams for the future. But Vincent knew this moment of peace was fragile. Questions remained unanswered. Decisions needed to be made. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the boss began calculating what this revelation would mean for his family, his business, and the dangerous world that had already claimed his son. Tommy's laughter echoed through the cemetery as he discovered a perfectly round stone, and Vincent realized that everything, absolutely everything, had just changed. The weight of this revelation settled over Vincent like a heavy blanket. His grandson, Anthony's son, The child he never knew existed was sitting right here, innocently arranging pebbles while the entire foundation of Vincent's world shifted beneath his feet. But as the initial shock began to fade, darker questions started creeping into his mind. Questions that came from decades of survival in a world where trust was a luxury and betrayal was currency. Sarah seemed to sense the change in his demeanor. Her body tensed as she watched him studying Tommy with new intensity. Vincent's trained eye began cataloging details he'd missed in his emotional haze. The way Sarah positioned herself between him and the boy, the nervous glances she kept shooting toward the cemetery entrance, the worn but clean clothes that spoke of careful budgeting and quiet desperation. "Sarah," Vincent said quietly, his voice carrying the edge that had made grown men confess their sins. "Tell me everything. From the beginning? I need to know exactly how you met my son, exactly what your relationship was, and exactly why you chose today to bring Tommy here." Sarah's face went pale. "I told you. I met him at the restaurant. We fell in love. When he died, I was pregnant. That's the story," Vincent replied, standing slowly. Tommy looked up from his rocks, sensing the shift in atmosphere but not understanding it. But stories can be crafted, rehearsed, perfected. In my experience, when something seems too convenient, it usually is. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "You think I'm lying?" Her voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing down at Tommy. "You think I somehow orchestrated this? That I've been planning for 3 years to ambush you at your son's grave with some elaborate con?" Vincent's expression remained neutral, but inside he felt the familiar coldness that had kept him alive in his dangerous world. "I think a woman with a child and no resources might be desperate enough to try anything. I think the resemblance could be coincidental. I think—" "Stop." Sarah's voice cut through his words like a blade. She stood up, pulling Tommy to his feet with her. "Just stop. I knew this was a mistake. I knew coming here was wrong." Tommy looked confused, his small hand clutching the flower he'd been saving for the grave. "Mama, are we leaving already? I didn't finish making the pattern." "We're going, baby," Sarah said, her voice thick with unshed tears. She looked at Vincent with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "Anthony told me you were suspicious of everyone, that you trusted no one. But he also said you were a good man underneath all the armor. I see now he was only half right." Vincent watched them start to walk away, and something twisted in his chest. The logical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 47 years, insisted he was being smart, cautious, protective of his family's legacy. But another part, a part that sounded suspiciously like his late wife's voice, whispered that he was making a terrible mistake. "Wait!" he called out. Sarah stopped but didn't turn around. "Prove it," Vincent said. "If Tommy is really Anthony's son, prove it to me." Sarah turned slowly, her eyes blazing with fury. "How exactly would you like me to do that, Mr. Santangelo? Should I have kept a DNA sample from your dead son? Should I have videotaped our most intimate moments? What kind of proof would satisfy a man who's forgotten how to trust his own heart?" The words stung because they held truth. Vincent had become so accustomed to deception, so used to people wanting something from him, that he'd forgotten how to recognize genuine emotion when he saw it. Tommy tugged on his mother's coat. "Mama, why is the grandpa man sad?" Both adults looked down at the boy, who was studying Vincent with those unnervingly familiar eyes. "He misses his son," Sarah said softly. "Just like we miss your daddy." Tommy nodded solemnly, then walked back to Vincent and held out his wilted daisy. "You can have this. When I'm sad, flowers make me feel better." Vincent stared down at the simple gesture. This child, whether his grandson or not, was offering comfort to a stranger who had just accused his mother of lying. The innocence, the kindness, the instinctive empathy, it was so much like Anthony at that age that Vincent felt his defenses crumbling. He knelt down and accepted the flower with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you, Tommy. That's very kind. My daddy used to bring Mama flowers," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "She still has them in a book at home. They're all brown now, but she says they're still beautiful because love made them special. Vincent looked up at Sarah, who had gone very still. You kept them? Pressed flowers? She whispered. Every single one he ever gave me. And letters. And photos. And… She stopped, her voice breaking. And the ring? What ring? Sarah's hand moved to her throat, where Vincent now noticed a thin gold chain disappearing beneath her dress. With shaking fingers, she pulled out a simple gold band with a small diamond. Nothing flashy, but clearly chosen with care. He proposed with this, she said, 3 weeks before he died. I wear it every day, not because we were married, but because it represents the future we were going to build together. She looked down at Tommy, then back at Vincent. The future that lives on in our son. Vincent studied the ring, and something clicked in his memory. Anthony had asked him about his grandmother's jewelry just a month before he died, specifically about a simple gold band that had belonged to Vincent's mother. Vincent had brushed off the question, too busy with business to pay attention to what seemed like idle curiosity. But now he realized Anthony had been planning to propose, planning to start a new life, planning to tell his father everything. The ring Sarah wore looked exactly like the one from his mother's jewelry box, the one that had gone missing after Anthony's death. Where did he get the ring? Vincent asked quietly. Sarah's brow furrowed. He said it was his grandmother's. He told me you'd given it to him years ago and said that when he found the right woman, he should use it to start his own family. Her voice grew uncertain. Why? Vincent felt the last of his suspicions crumble. Only Anthony would have known about that ring. Only Anthony would have remembered the story Vincent had told him as a child, about how his own father had proposed to his mother with that same simple band during the Great Depression, when they had nothing but love and hope. Because, Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion, I never gave him that ring. He took it from his grandmother's jewelry box without asking. I found it missing after his funeral and assumed someone had stolen it during the wake. He looked at Sarah with new eyes. But Anthony wasn't a thief. He was a young man in love, planning to propose to the woman who was carrying his child. Sarah's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than grief. You believe me. I believe you, Vincent confirmed. He looked down at Tommy, who was now sitting on the grass beside Anthony's headstone, humming softly to himself. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for doubting you, for making you prove something that should have been accepted with joy. I'm sorry for being the kind of man who made you afraid to come to me in the first place. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Anthony said you were complicated. He said you'd built walls so high that sometimes you couldn't see over them yourself. But he also said that when those walls came down, there was no one more loyal, more protective, more loving than Vincent Santangelo. Vincent felt something break open in his chest, not painful this time, but healing, like a wound that had been closed too tightly finally getting air and light. Tell me about him, Vincent said, settling down on the grass beside Tommy. Tell me about my grandson. What is he like? What makes him laugh? What are his dreams? Sarah's expression softened. She sat down across from them, completing a small circle around Anthony's grave. He's brilliant, she said, pride evident in her voice. He taught himself to read when he was 3. He devours books the way other kids devour candy. And he has this incredible imagination. He builds entire worlds with his toys, complete with stories and characters and adventures. Tommy looked up from his humming. I'm going to write books someday, he announced, like the ones Daddy used to read. Mama has pictures of him with lots and lots of books. Vincent's throat tightened. Anthony had been a voracious reader too, constantly bringing home new novels and biographies that he'd discuss with anyone who would listen. Vincent had often found it frivolous, wishing his son would focus more on business matters. Now he saw it as part of Anthony's gentle nature, his desire to understand the world through stories and ideas rather than through power and intimidation. He's also incredibly empathetic, Sarah continued, sometimes too much so. He cries when he sees other people hurting. He shares his toys with kids who don't have any. Last month, He gave his favorite stuffed animal to a little girl at the playground because she was sad about her parents' divorce. Vincent studied his grandson with wonder. In his world, empathy was often seen as weakness. But looking at Tommy, seeing the strength it took to care so deeply about others, Vincent began to understand that maybe Anthony had been right about needing to find a different path. "What about you?" Vincent asked Sarah. "What's your life like? How are you managing?" Sarah's expression grew guarded again. "We're fine. I work double shifts at 2 different restaurants now. Tommy stays with Mrs. Chen, no relation, just coincidence with the name, during the day. She's an elderly woman in our building who loves children. We have a small apartment in Queens. It's not much, but it's clean and safe, and it's ours." Vincent heard what she wasn't saying. The exhaustion in her voice, the way she described their life in terms of survival rather than living. The careful pride that masked deeper struggles. "Are you happy?" he asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I'm content," she finally said. "Tommy is healthy and happy. We have a roof over our heads and food on the table. I get to watch him grow up and discover the world. That's more than many people have." But Vincent could see the loneliness in her eyes, the weight of carrying everything alone, the dreams she'd put aside to focus on survival. She was barely 26 years old, still young enough to build the life she'd planned with Anthony, but she'd closed herself off from those possibilities to focus entirely on their son. "Sarah," Vincent said carefully, "I want to help. Immediately." Her walls went up. "We don't need charity. It's not charity. It's family taking care of family." Vincent's voice grew stronger, more certain. "Tommy is my grandson. You're the woman my son loved enough to die for. Because make no mistake, he was coming to see me that night, to fight for you, to fight for the life you were building together. That makes you family too." Sarah shook her head. "I can't accept your money, Mr. Santangelo. I won't have Tommy growing up thinking he's entitled to things he didn't earn. And I won't have him learning that money solves everything." Vincent looked at this woman, this fierce, protective mother who had raised his grandson alone, and felt something shift inside him. Not the calculating businessman or the feared crime boss, but simply a grandfather who had missed 4 years of a little boy's life. "Then we do this differently," he said quietly. "Not charity, not handouts, partnership." Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but she was listening. "I want to be part of Tommy's life. I want him to know his grandfather, to hear stories about his father, to understand where he comes from. And I want you to have the support you should have had from the beginning." Vincent's voice grew stronger. "Let me help you build the life Anthony dreamed of. The clean life, the honest life." Tommy looked up from his pebble patterns. "Does this mean you'll come visit us, Grandpa?" Vincent's heart cracked wide open. "If your mama says yes, I'd like that very much." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for traces of manipulation or control. Instead, she saw only a broken man trying to find his way back to something real. "We take this slow," she finally said, "one step at a time. And the moment I think this world is touching my son, our son, we disappear. Do you understand?" Vincent nodded. "I understand. And Sarah, thank you. Thank you for keeping him safe. Thank you for raising him with love. Thank you for bringing him here today." As the 3 of them sat together in the morning sun, Vincent realized that sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do isn't to take control. It's to let love lead the way. Anthony's greatest gift wasn't the empire he'd rejected, but the family he'd created and the grandfather he'd unknowingly given a second chance at doing things right. Sometimes what we think we've lost forever finds a way back to us. Sometimes love really is stronger than fear. And sometimes, in a quiet cemetery on an ordinary morning, everything changes with the innocent question of a 4-year-old boy asking if you want to help make his daddy's grave pretty.